If you're eating the wrong diet, things probably occur that shouldn't occur. And I think most disease that we see today, has at least in some part a dietary component.
Hey everyone, welcome to Health Theory. Today's guest is Dr. Shawn Baker. He's an orthopedic surgeon, record-setting powerlifter, one-time semi-professional rugby player, all-American track and field masters athlete, former nuclear weapons launch officer, and most recently, the guy known for popularizing the carnivore diet. And Shawn, that's where I want to start. So the carnivore diet obviously has gotten a little bit controversial. People are kind of weird about it. I'll say I do what I'll call a lazy man's carnivore diet. So I eat probably 90% of my calories come from meat, primarily red meat, some pork. What is it that makes a carnivore diet so controversial, and why do you still think it's worth trying?
Well, first of all, Tom, thanks for having me on. The carnivore diet, yes, certainly is controversial because it goes against what we've been told from a nutrition science standpoint for the last, 100 years or so. If we tell people that, meat is really bad for us, which we've heard, particularly red meat, we've heard that for decades now. We've got people that are really only eating red meat, and what would you expect to happen to their health would be they would get very sick acutely or even over a period of time. But in fact, what we're seeing is quite the opposite. And I think that is something that rubs a lot of people the wrong way because they have a lot of personal investment in a different narrative. And I think that is why it's partially controversial. I think there's a sort of a comfort in saying that, everything in moderation and in balance, even though we can't really accurately define what those mean, quite honestly, but that's just sort of a platitude people put out. Well, I believe in a balanced diet. Well, when I ask people, well, what does that mean to you? And what does it mean to someone from another culture? They have very different definitions. And so we have to look at, I think, the full spectrum of human existence to say what is perhaps the ideal diet. And as humans, we're very lucky that we have a diverse capacity to eat a lot of different things. Doesn't mean, I would say that if you were to take people from 100,000 years ago and offer them Doritos and Twinkies, they would definitely eat them. Does not mean we're designed for that.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me. Are there cues that we can look at a human to see if we're a true omnivore and what that means? And
yeah, so no doubt humans are omnivorous. We clearly are. We can look at every human that's been on the planet. We can say that they've been eating a little bit of everything. The question is how much of what is represented. And so I think when we look at how to determine what something's suited for, really as a human being, what is the overall impact to your health, to your performance, to how you actually, feel, subjectively and objectively. You feed somebody a certain diet and see what happens to them. And, I would say that if you're eating the wrong diet, things probably occur that shouldn't occur. And I think most disease that we see today, has at least in some part a dietary component. If we sit there and eat, this modern industrial diet of novel foods that really aren't designed for us, we see what happens. We see depression, we see autoimmune disease, we see gastrointestinal problems, we see chronic obesity, we see all these things. And a lot of these things we attribute to aging, which probably aren't really aging, it's just disease. And I like to use, so the world record for a 100-meter sprint at 85 is about 15 seconds.
At 85 years old?
85 years old, which is a pretty decent time.
Yeah, no kidding.
So I like to say, if you can run 100 meters in 15 seconds, you're probably on the right side of being dead. This is just a simple heuristic, but it makes sense. You think about a wild animal, the weak, the slow get eaten, right? And the same thing happens to humans. As we break down, as we deteriorate, we don't get eaten by lions, we get eaten by disease. And so if you can maintain, whatever you were at, say 25, whenever you're at your physical peak, and you can stay as close to that as possible for as long as possible, you've not only, in my view, prolonged your life, but most importantly, prolonged the quality of your life, prolonged your function. And there's clear evidence that, athletic ability, lean muscle mass, it protects you from disease, it protects you from, dying, it allows you to function better. So I think it can be as simple as that.
How old are you?
53.
Okay, so talking about holding peak performance as you age, I know last year you set a rowing record and you're going back to defend that again. So that's certainly very impressive. How do you maintain that peak level of performance?
Well, just to be accurate, so I won a world championships last year. I set 3 world records when I turned 50. When I was at the world championship and I was in the 50 plus class, I was in my age class. But I've been training my whole life. It's not like one day I woke up and said, I'm going to be a good athlete. I've been consistently doing the basics for 40 plus years. And, it's something that, is important to me. I'm a competitive guy. It drives me. It's part of my identity. It's just kind of built in at this point. But I eat what I think is a very good diet, and I'm not promoting that everybody needs to do a carnivorous diet. I think there's
Do you back off that because there's so much backlash around it, or do you back off of that because truly it won't work for some people?
No, I back off because I think most people don't need to do it.
Mm-hmm.
There's people that are doing, largely well above average and very good from a health perspective. And if they're doing great, I don't see what you need to change it for.
Is the metric that you use, because I know, at least in the interviews that I heard with you in particular, you don't worry about your blood levels. So is it that you just go, hey, how do you feel, how do you perform, and that's the metric you should care about?
So let me clarify. So it's not that I don't agree with blood tests or that I haven't checked them, because I've done a round of blood tests because people were asking me. I was like, okay, I'll just do it. It's no big deal. But I think you have to be very careful in your interpretation of blood tests, because you have to put it in clinical context. As a physician, I viewed thousands upon thousands of blood tests, and very often you'll get one that's not quite perfectly within the standard reference range, and you'll say, is that relevant to what's going on with that particular patient? So we have a lot of people that are kind of armchair quarterbacks trying to do medicine with lab work, and they just look at these labs and say, aha, that one's out of range, you must be sick. And that's not necessarily true. We have to understand that many of these labs have incredible variability. Cholesterol is one of these things. A guy named Dave Feldman is showing that he can change his LDL cholesterol 100 points in 3 or 4 days. And so we're sitting there, you go in once a year for your annual test, and your cholesterol is borderline high, and your doctor says, hey, we're going to put you on this drug for the rest of your life. When you could have come in 3 days later and it would have been normal. Your blood level of vitamin D can change 30% in a day, within the course of a day. So depending what time of day you get it drawn. Things like cholesterol and all these other ones, they change so much. And so what you really want to know is what is going on chronically. And so I like things like coronary artery calcium scan. That's a cardiac test you can take by looking at the calcium in your heart. It gives you an idea.
How do you run that test?
So it's a CT scan. So, and I had that done about 2 years into the diet, and coronary artery calcium scan, perfect zero, no calcification. Very good metric for assessing disease. Now there are people who say, well, it might miss soft plaques and so on and so forth. But still, the people that have no calcium have the least likelihood of having plaque or anything from cardiovascular disease. An easy method is just waist to height measurement. We know that if your belly is too big, relative to your height, you're at risk for metabolic, you basically have metabolic disease. And so these things that are more probably chronic representation, because there's a lot of people out there walking around that have really nice lab values, but they're not healthy. And so the problem is when we chase lab values rather than health, we get a very different set of goals. And so when you have somebody could have a perfectly stable glucose for 10 years, and they have hyperinsulinemia. So in the background, they have disease, they have the pathophysiology going on, but we just haven't detected it yet. And so I think that's a bit of a travesty, quite honestly.
So breaking out of that though, what should people be paying attention to? So things I've heard you say before. So okay, we've got waist to height ratio. You've got, if you're a guy, are you waking up with erections? You've got the calcification of the heart. Like, what are other things that we should really be paying attention to?
I think insulin sensitivity is probably a useful metric. If you look at the relationship of pretty much every chronic disease and hyperinsulinemia, we see a pretty consistent relationship. Now again, I sort of rally against associations because there's some problems with that. But in general, I think those things are important. Like I said, you mentioned sexual function. That's very important. It's some people laugh about it, but it's a very important part of health.
Why is it important? I've heard it said that basically erectile dysfunction is a precursor to heart disease. Like if you're having vascular problems there, chances are that you have a bigger problem going on at the level of the heart as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Some people call it a canary in the coal mine. And obviously our male member is a blood dependent organ, right? We all know that. And so when you do have impeded blood flow, in any part of your body, it's probably occurring systemically unless there's some trauma or something like that. So we see that. So it is a concern for cardiovascular disease. So the fact that at 53 of age. I wake up every day with an erection, indicates indicates what's going on with my heart, because, as I said, I had a coronary artery calcium scan of 0. What I'm doing athletically would also indicate good cardiovascular function. I don't know if you've ever been on one of these, if you've had CrossFit or something like that with the Concept 2s, they're very challenging from a cardiovascular standpoint.
So that's interesting. So talk to me about exercise, heart health. Obviously, you're very known for talking about diet, but also, just standing next to you, you are a wall of muscle. So you clearly take care of yourself physically, you push yourself. One, I think people, like you said, that people look at aging as sort of this inevitable thing, but in reality, you've retained a lot of muscle mass. So one, can we add muscle as we age? 2, why does that matter? And then 3, how do we do it?
Yeah, so, as far as can you gain muscle, yes, you can definitely gain muscle pretty much at any age. There's studies in people in their 80s that have shown that they can put on muscle mass. Now, the formula for that is pretty simple. It's adequate protein, adequate leucine, resistance training, either heavyweight or lightweight, depending on, you've got to stimulate the muscles maximally. And then for most people, it's some sort of caloric surplus. And you can get that through carbohydrates, you can get that through fat. But beyond that, what do you have to do? At this point, at 53, I like to make sure that, I spend some time dedicated to actually getting stronger, it's basic compound movements, some time spent, trying to build muscle to maintain that. It's not that you have to have huge, giant bodybuilder muscles, but having lean muscle mass, being in the top. There's a nice study, the Honolulu longevity study looked at strength in midlife. People that were in the highest quartile for strength had a 250% chance increase of making it to 100.
Whoa.
So it's so important to do that. It's almost as important as genetics.
What is it? Muscle mass, muscle density, the ability to contract the muscle? Because I've heard you say that it's not necessarily size, it's strength.
Yeah.
Is it that they didn't, in the study, they didn't make a differentiation between strength and size? Because if I really think at just a biological level what's going on, it would seem like if you get really sick, that there are amino acids and things you're going to go down and strip from your own muscle to recover from that. And if you have no muscle to strip, then you're just done. But that would lead me to believe that size would be pretty important.
Yeah, so there's a clear correlation between cross-sectional muscle area and strength. Oh, that's being challenged. We're seeing some research showing that you can be very strong with relatively smaller muscles. So I think ultimately when we look at the longevity, it's really strength and really strength to size ratio that's important. So you want to be lean and strong. And I think with strength comes function. So function for one is important. When we lose some of our independence for walking, again when we get to the end of life, we see people that lose some independence with walking, and strength plays a big role in that. There is, it's not that it's not that there's no relationship between strength and size. So there is some, but the research has shown it's strength. And I think, quite honestly, because most of it is looked at older people are typically not bodybuilders. And so we're not looking at Mr. Olympia versus the puny guy. We're looking at kind of normal people, a normal distribution. We can say these kind of, normal people, the ones that are on the stronger end of the spectrum, do better than the people that aren't. And so when we see you don't have much physiologic reserve, particularly muscle mass, when we do get struck with disease, cancer, infectious disease, something like that, not having that sort of buffer that the muscle provides tends to produce a worse outcome.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I want to go back and walk through the lineage of how humans end up here. So the evolution question. So one day I was thinking about, okay, where do we fall in the spectrum of what we should be eating and all of that? And I was like, all right, if we share a common ancestor with monkeys and chimpanzees, gorillas, whatever, obviously gorillas chew a ton, like they're all about leaves. I know that chimpanzees actually get some percentage of their calories from killing other animals, not the least of which being other chimpanzees. So how much do you think is there truth to we came down out of the trees as food became more scarce, as we started turning into hunters, we find cooking, all of that stuff that allows us to grow the bigger brain? Like what was that sort of rough step-by-step process that you think led us to being the omnivores that we are?
Yeah, so if we go back even further, there's research now that shows that the very first animals, the very first multicellular animals started out as carnivorous animals. And you think about it, when you're trying to build structure, it's very easy to take like and build like. And so when we go to different sort of building materials, it becomes less efficient. You have to have specialized adaptations. And so going back about 800 million years, the very first animals appear to be carnivore. And most of the animals that have ever been on the planet have been carnivorous. So an herbivore is a really specialized adaptation. Grasslands evolved about 100 million years ago. So we started seeing the first larger herbivores come in then. But if we go back to primate evolution, about 25 million years, we've had, monkeys, and then eventually, the ones that are still remaining, the bonobos, the chimpanzees, the gorillas, they've had 25 million years of evolution to try and develop increased brain size, and they've been doing it on a fruit-based diet. It has not worked. It has not, they've got 25 million years of trying it and it doesn't work. And so something had to change to allow the differentiation into what we are now. And so if we look back in the global climate record, starting between 5 and 3 million years ago, we saw a dramatic shift in what happened with global temperatures. And so we went from a lush tropical environment to a very much a colder savanna, type situation, grasslands. And so if we look at, what humans and pre-humans were experiencing, it was more kind of Canada and not Costa Rica. So we've got this situation where the food supply is very different. And some of the early, hominids tried to make it on a vegetarian diet. There were things like Australopithecus robustus and boisei, and they just went extinct. And so because they couldn't survive in the environment. And so we've had, in human evolution, there's all kinds of humans that evolved. And what occurred was, as we grew this bigger brain, it required a more and more efficient, effective, caloric-dense fuel source, and that was animal fat. And we know that going back to Homo erectus, just with simple spear technology, they had no trouble killing elephants. And that's what they usually use was their food of choice. And you think about it, if you and I were to be magically transported back 50,000 years, and our technology was spears, and we could say, well, you can gather, plants for 3 days to get 1,000, 2,000 calories, or you can go out and kill one of these big slow things that doesn't run away, that just looks at you. Because, remember, these animals sort of evolved with really no predators. I mean, lions might eat the small elephants, but beyond that, once they're full size, they're like, what are you going to do to me, puny human? And so we see that when humans, in Africa, they kind of co-evolved, and so they had this abundance of food, abundance of fuel. It helped them to grow that bigger brain. I think that's what occurs. And if we, comparative anatomy, if you look at another primate and we look at their digestive tract, humans have, on an anatomic basis, looking at what the hardware is, not the software, but the hardware, 17% of our digestive tract is able to ferment. When we compare that to a chimp or an ape, or a gorilla, they've got something like 50 to 60% of their gut can ferment. So we lost much of that fermentative capacity, which means we cannot get a lot of nutrition from fiber. These are folivores that eat leaves. We can't get much nutrition from that. It's one of the reasons why a plant-based diet helps people lose weight, because they're just not absorbing much nutrition. So they lose weight. Maybe it's not the best way to lose weight. So that's we just don't have that capacity anymore.
It's really interesting. Now, given that we have the 17% ability to ferment, when you hear the standard advice about all things in moderation, like there's, I don't know, something intuitive about that feels right. I've never lived my life like that, but when people say it, I'm always like, oh God, like there is something haunting about that. And if we know that we are omnivores, why is it advantageous to go so full on into carnivore? Is there something that's missed? Is it a complete diet? Could you literally live on red meat forever? Or are there times where you feel that it's important to dip in and have some vegetables because there are micronutrients or whatever missing?
Yeah, so, if you were to ask me what is probably a realistic, ancient diet for humans, it's probably a whole bunch of meat and probably a few plants here and there, probably fruit being most common. If you think about what's available to you, fruit is generally well tolerated. Nuts and seeds, without processing can be very tough. A handful of cashews raw can kill you. 5 kidney beans can kill you if you eat them unprocessed. So, that was probably the basic diet. Now we have so many people today where their digestive system has been probably destroyed by, I think seed oils and some of these other products that we were exposed to. I think that compromises people so they don't, tolerate
Why do you think
other foods.
seed oil is the big problem?
Well, so there is some research. There's a group out of Hungary called the Paleomedicine group, and they've looked at gut permeability. And there's a concept called leaky gut. So normally our digestive tract, we eat the food, we absorb things we want to take in, and we don't allow anything else extra to come in there. There's some degree of permeability that's normal, but we get this exaggerated permeability that occurs when we're exposed to certain foods. Seed oils is flagged as one of them based on their research. When they look at it, they said every time someone eats seed oils, gut permeability increases significantly, and that allows bacterial endotoxins, LP, lipopolysaccharides, other things to be absorbed through the gut barrier, and then it tends to cause problems in the body, whether it's autoimmune disease or many other problems. And so when we go back to the baseline, and I think all humans have the capacity, at least a healthy human. Now there's people where as they age, we lose some of our digestive capacity. One of the common things we see with people as they get older, their gastric pH, goes up. They don't have the capacity to produce a really acidic stomach environment. Humans have among the most acidic stomach environments on the planet compared to almost any other animal. We are on par with things like hyenas and vultures, which were scavenger animals. And the thought is the reason we developed that is because initially when we were an Australopithecine or something like that, we scavenged meat, and that meat was probably sitting out for a while. It was probably heavily contaminated. And so the animals that had a more robust pH that could kill that, lived out. This is the natural selection sort of theory on that. But as far as why somebody would do that, is it something you can do for a long time? I mean, I've done it for 3 years. I mean, I've basically had essentially only red meat with the exception of some fish here and there, some eggs here and there, some spices occasionally. I got to eat in a restaurant. And 3 years in, I'm winning world championships. So, I mean, if there's a deficiency, maybe it's a 10-year deficiency. I'm kind of skeptical about that. There's people that have been doing this stuff for 10 years, 20 years that are still thriving. And it's kind of interesting to see. And it just makes sense from an evolutionary plausibility standpoint. What food, if there was some essential plant nutrient, some essential plant food that you had to have to survive, how would you get from Africa to Europe to Asia, across the Bering Strait, into Alaska, down to North America? What plant would be there that you had to have? And so I cannot think of, if you can tell me a blueberry is essential for human nutrition, I'm going to say, where do you get blueberries in the Bering Strait 50,000 years ago when it's frozen? So, I mean, it's like you can always get meat, though.
Yeah, that's look, man, so one, I love what you're doing with the N of 1 stuff, and just I feel like there's a whole movement happening right now where people are going, I get it, like I don't have proof, but I'm telling you I'm living it, and it's kind of rad. So I partly because of well, actually, let me back up. So used to be 60 pounds heavier, but not in a good way, all just fat, a little bit more muscle in fairness. But mostly in putting on muscle, I was on a seafood diet. So if I saw food, I ate it.
I've been on that one.
Yeah. And it was actually, I was eating so much, I hated eating. It was just, but I didn't want to miss a second to put on muscle. So I ended up putting on a lot of fat, and I decided, okay, I'm going to get lean. And I did. I got very fucking lean. And I did it by basically rabbit starvation. So I was eating very high protein, probably 85% of my calories came from protein. I tried to keep my carbohydrates to 0, and I tried to keep my fat to 0. So the 15% was like shit sneaking in, right, just because I couldn't not. Yeah, you can't just eat the chicken breast. But I got as close as I could. And I did that for 2 years. I got shredded, would be an exaggeration, but I got very lean, 6-pack abs, the whole 9. And it was miserable. I hated my life. I was hungry around the clock. And my wife and business partners pulled me aside and said, you no longer have a personality. And I was like, wow, I really need to take this seriously. And the big thing was, and I'd struggled with this my whole life, so I didn't make the connection, unfortunately. My wrists hurt so badly that even in my 20s, I was icing them every night. And I iced them every night for about 15 years. I iced them so much that I had what looked like burn marks on the back of my wrist. And that was misery. And then I met Peter Attia and Dom D'Agostino, and they said, man, this whole keto thing, you need to be eating fat. And I just could not wrap my head around that. I was like, it's called fat. It's going to make me fat. Like, I'm not going to eat this stuff. They're like, don't be a dumbass, eat it. And so I went therapeutic ketosis. So I was doing a 4-to-1 ratio. It was misery. It was gross. I had the keto flu the whole 9. But within 3 days, my wrist stopped hurting. And I was like, whoa. It is the closest food-related thing to having a drug-like effect I've ever experienced in my life. And so I went off keto for a year because I had had such a bad experience with it, but I kept my fat high and my wrists have never hurt since. That was insanely transformative. And then through that, just because I'm super lazy, I didn't want to have to try to do it through vegetables, which is a lot more, just takes a lot more concentration. And I found myself, I was probably taking in, 85, like I said, 85, 90% of my calories now come from red meat and like a nice fatty pork rib. And it's been awesome. But I've kind of, until people started talking about the carnivore diet, I was kind of holding my breath like, am I fucking up my microbiome? Am I moving myself backwards in some way that I, can't see yet? And so at one point I pushed hard and I went heavily vegetable because for ethical reasons, I would love to never need to eat meat. And I started to feel like shit. Now it's entirely possible I just didn't do it well. I'm willing to accept that. But sliding backwards into the most ignorant way of getting in red meat, and I feel fucking awesome.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there. And so I would say, for one, if we look at biochemically, what do humans need? What are our essential requirements? There are only essential amino acids, essential fats, vitamins, and minerals. That's it. There's no fiber, there's no phytonutrient. Those are not requirements. Those are conditionally maybe beneficial, but they're not required. So we look at absolute requirements. So if you're, rabid starvation, too much protein, and I would say that if we look evolutionary, I think probably most humans were getting about 30 to 40% of their calories from protein. The rest, majority of the rest would be from fat, and then maybe a few, plant foods here and there. So I think, when you go too much on the protein for too long, that's a problem, and we see that with people. And I did something similar when I went from 300 pounds to 230 pounds in a course of 3 months. I did the same thing. Whoa. I exercised 3 times a day. I cut my caloric intake in half. Just plowed through it like a competitor. I'm just going to do it. And I was at work at the hospital, and the nurse says, "Hey, we like Fat Dr. Baker better because you're not so pissed off and grumpy all the time." And it's the same thing. You can't sustain it. You're miserable. You're hungry. This is the thing. For a diet to succeed, you have to, the 2 things that make diets not succeed are, 1, you're hungry all the time because you can't maintain that. And 2, the food sucks, right? So if you go like, I like eating Oreos and ice cream and Twinkies and cake and cookies, that's good. Now, you're going to say, I can't eat that, but what am I going to replace it with? Well, you're going to replace it with quinoa and kale, and that kind of sucks. But you can say, hey, maybe if you replace it with steak and eggs, which are, for most people, guys particularly, hey, that's pretty good stuff, I can do that. It's satiety producing, and it's also very nutritious. And again, I don't necessarily think everybody needs to be 100%, but when you get your nutritional needs met through, meat, whether it's, and you might add eggs, you might add organ meat, some people are proponents of that, some are fish or something like that, or a little bit of dairy, you are much more likely to be satisfied, you're much more likely to be able to eat infrequently. When the food is right, I think the autophagy, the intermittent fasting happens naturally. And that's what happened. Like when I eat twice a day, that's pretty much my routine. Some days it's once, occasionally it's 3 times, but it's just because I eat enough, I'm satisfied, I eat to my satiety. And you think about what other animal needs an app to eat, a micronutrient table to eat, a dietitian behind them telling them how to eat. I mean, they just eat, and they don't have chronic disease, and they stay healthy. So there should be a food for humans where you can just eat to satiety, eat when you're hungry, and maintain a healthy level of body weight and avoid disease. And I think a meat-based diet seems to, and when I say seems to, because I'm on a very biased, I'm biased. I see the results, I see the positive results. I get everyday people sending me the results, so I'm very much, this seems to be pretty cool. I'm excited to announce that Harvard, David Ludwig, is going to be doing a carnivore study. This episode will come out after it's been announced. So we're going to be starting to do that and get more actual, real modern data on this stuff.
Do you know what the study is going to be? Or like the thing I'm really curious about is, will it include organ meat, or are we just talking like some burgers?
Well, it'll include whatever people are eating. So we're gonna try to get as many people as possible.
So this is people already doing
This is people that have already been doing it for 6 months. It's going to be a survey. It's going to be looking at their blood work. It's going to be assessing their health. Obviously there's a lot of potential confounders and subjective bias and stuff like that. But it's getting that in the literature, and then going from there and say, look, we have a population of 3,000 or 4,000 people that have submitted to us to a study, and they are maybe they're all sick and dying, or maybe they're really healthy, which I think the latter is going to be the case. But so when we get that in the literature, now we have power to say, okay, now let's do some intervention trials. Let's see what it does for psoriasis. Let's see what it does for rheumatoid arthritis. Let's see what it does for depression. Because what I'm seeing anecdotally, I'm just seeing every day I get people, hey, I had PTSD, it's gone, or it's significantly better. No, seriously. I had suicidal depression. I don't think about suicide anymore.
Do you think this is inflammation?
I think it's a combination of things. And so if we look at it from a mental health standpoint, we know that creatine, carnosine, carnitine, taurine, all things are found almost exclusively in meat. Now, granted, your body can make some of that, but when it's in lower levels, and we know that people on plant-based diets have lower levels. There was a nice study in 2018 looking at carnitine levels in people with major depressive disorder. Their carnitine levels are low when you supplement carnitine. Again, carnitine is a meat-based product. Their depression gets better. So we see that. And so it's probably, one, maybe reduction in brain inflammation, but two, also supplying these nutrients that have sort of positive, brain chemistry effects. And so the thought that nutrition has no role in mental health disease is mind-boggling to me, that people think it doesn't. I mean, how could it not? I mean, your brain is just an organ like any other organ in your body, like your liver is. It's subjected to the same environmental, goodness and badness that everything else is. And so why nutrition wouldn't have an impact on brain health?
Also, the connection to the gut.
Right.
So in terms of controlling neurochemistry, huge influence. Serotonin almost exclusively stored in the gut, released from there. That one's crazy. And then the whole notion of leaky brain syndrome.
Right, leaky gut and leaky brain are parallel. If you have a leaky gut, you probably have a leaky blood-brain barrier.
Yeah, that does seem very striking that people would push back on that. One thing I want to know, so like I said, I do sort of a lazy man's carnivore diet. You're the first person I've heard talk where it's like, hey, you're not pushing organ meat really hard. You're even saying, like maybe grass-fed's a bit better, but like grain-fed's a lot better than going out and eating a Twinkie. So do I need to eat organ meat? Because I really don't want to.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. So I know there's people that disagree with me, and like I said, my whole sort of belief system is, let me see what the results people are actually having.
The way they feel, or blood levels.
Well,
like
all of it,
all
of it. Because the results are generally, are you reversing disease? Mm-hmm. Are you improving body composition? Are you, can you subjectively and objectively say you're healthier?
But what if you're already healthy? Like, I'm a healthy dude. I've been living a healthy lifestyle since my mid-20s. So I'm not going to be the guy where you see some massive swing. I will say, from my rabbit starvation, my doctor loved it because my cholesterol was in the fucking dirt. Sure. But I felt like death. Right. So that was not fun.
Yeah, that's a great example of great labs, but feel like garbage. Right.
So that's what I'm trying to figure out. Like, so a guy like me, what should I be paying attention to? Because I've heard you say many times, we're never going to know if this is going to make you live longer, right? That is an experiment that takes an entire lifetime.
Right.
So I don't fucking know, but I want like the best guess. So actually, while I guess it makes people like sort of giggle under their breath, but okay, erection. Like, am I waking up with an erection or not? I love it. That's a metric.
Yep.
How do I feel psychologically? A metric. Waist to height ratio, metric. Like, I want to know, like, what are the things that, as doctors get educated, what should they be looking for to know whether to assign somebody a carnivore diet? And then what should they be looking for to know if the carnivore diet is working?
Right. So I think, we have such a sick society. There was a study came out that said 88% of us are metabolically unhealthy.
88?
So 88%. There's only 12% of Americans that fit a criteria of normal metabolic health parameters. So we've got this is why this is so important. We have such a disaster, and it's only going to get worse. And the problem is, with this, obesity, diabesity epidemic, that will turn into a dementia epidemic, and that's impossible to take care of. But so when we look at, you the healthy guy, so I would say now you're at performance. It's like, how fast can I run a mile? How fast can I run 100 meters, right? How much can I lift? What's my body composition like? Am I waking up with a boner every morning? Am I, where am I doing? What do my joints hurt? Does my back hurt? Those are the things that really matter to you. You could care less what your LDL cholesterol is. If it's 75 and you feel like garbage, it's like, I don't really care about that. I want to feel and perform and do well, subjectively. So that's part of my life experience, right? The thought of, what do we need to eat on a carnivorous diet? This is the thing. And I've done surveys. I did a survey a couple months ago. I got 11,000 responses in 24 hours. And we asked them 25 questions. What are you eating? The interesting things to me were how many of you were taking prescription medications and how many of you came off your prescription medications. And, we didn't stratify by period of time. It could have been 3 months or less. 70% of those people dropped their meds.
Whoa.
And so it's like that's significant health improvement. Then you say, how many of you guys are eating organ meats on a regular basis? 15%. So 85% of the people are eating them either not at all or very, very rarely.
Do you eat organ meat?
I don't generally. I mean, I've eaten, when it's offered to me and someone has it, I'll eat it. I generally don't like it.
Are you eating it because you're just like hedging your bets?
No, I eat it because I don't want to offend the person that cooked it for me. I'm not eating it because I'm worried about some deficiency.
Right.
I mean, again, if you look at the people that have been doing this diet the longest, the pioneers, the guys who've been doing it the 20, 21 years, they just eat steaks and ground beef and they're fine.
All right, here's a random question for you. So watching a documentary on wolves, the alpha always gets to eat the liver, I think it is. Why would that matter if it doesn't have some extra oomph?
So this is, I think, one of the things with, when we look at animals, okay, usually a predator animal is hunting a prey animal that's relatively lean. Protein is not a concern on a meat-based diet. You're going to get plenty of protein. What you're not going to get is fat. Where is fat located on a lean animal? It's located in the viscera. So they go after the perinephric fat, the pericardial fat, the omentum. This is where the concentrated fat is. And this is why we see that, we hear historical accounts of, polar societies where they'll throw away the lean meat to the dogs because I got plenty of protein. What I don't have is fat. Remember, fat is, that's why I remember you with your sore wrists. Only eating protein. I'm like, there's only so much I can eat of that, and then I need some fat. And so I think really it's fat-seeking behavior. That's why we're cracking bones to get the marrow. That's why we're eating brains, because brains are high in fat. It's not necessarily that there's some magical nutrient in them. And yes, liver has more vitamin E. Yes, liver has some vitamin C. But I don't think, again, I don't have scurvy. I haven't had vitamin C in any significant quantity outside of what I get in steaks in 3 years. And scurvy is a water-soluble vitamin. I would get symptom within a few months, and then I would get sick. And so we're not seeing that. Now, some people, some people feel better on that. And I think some people that are particularly vitamin depleted, that's probably a good strategy. And I think some people, I think you just have to experiment. Like if you sit there and choke down liver because you don't like it, say, I'm just doing it out of my duty. And you say, I notice no improvement, or maybe there's some placebo effect where you notice something for a little bit. If you don't notice it consistently, maybe you don't need it.
Yeah, agreed. I can't let you go without talking to you a little bit about the military. Your experience is all over the fucking map. It's so fascinating. Like looking at you, I'm expecting a meathead, but you're not a meathead. You're a surgeon. You've served in the military, nuclear launch officer.
Yeah. I used to be in charge of hundreds of nuclear warheads. Back in the Air Force. Yeah, I used to be the guy that. If you guys saw the movie War Games back in the day, I was one of the guys who was down.
Did you want to be that guy?
It was kind of funny. So I was in medical. I went to college, University of Texas. Went to medical school. Got roped into playing rugby. This guy named Paul McCartney, who was not the Beatle, but he had a gym. So he said, you need to play rugby. And so I started playing rugby, and then I liked rugby, and I ended up being pretty good. I got selected on the Western U.S. team and the All-Texas team, and then I got recruited to play in New Zealand. So I was like, I'm in medical school, and I was like, yeah, fuck it, I'm gonna go play rugby in New Zealand. So I dropped out of medical school, much to the chagrin of my medical school professors. They're like, you're a good guy, why are you doing it? I was like, man, I want to play rugby. So I went there, and then I went into the military as a nuclear weapons officer when I came back, so I could continue to play rugby for the military. So I played up until I was 30, and during that time, my day job was nuclear weapons guy. So this was just simply something to do while I played rugby, right? And then I got tired of it. I remember I was playing this team from Russia, and I was laying on the bottom of a pile, and this guy was kicking me in the head, and I had blood coming out of my ears. And I'm like,
Jesus.
I'm 30, I'm done, I want to go back. So I went back to medical school. The military paid for that. And so when I got out, they immediately, I immediately had to repay my time to them as a surgeon. So they immediately sent me to Afghanistan, and this is like, crazy, crazy time.
What year
Everybody
is
blown.
this?
This is 2007.
Wow.
Yeah, so 2007, middle of Afghan war, and it was just all day long, every day, trauma, constant trauma, people being blown up, the worst injuries you could possibly see, little kids, we took care of Taliban, we took care of, the good guys, the bad guys, the civilians. I mean, it was just nonstop. It was every single day.
How do you deal with that? Like, how do you compartmentalize the trauma? Like, even just hearing someone scream, I've got to imagine, like, being back and hearing someone scream would bring that back. How do you frame that? How do you get that?
Yeah, I mean, it was such a unique situation. I mean, combat trauma is just not a normal. I mean, the closest thing I ever saw as a physician was a refinery explosion where we got, people again blown up or a train accident. But I mean, generally, it's so out of the normal realm of my existence. I don't associate anything normal day to day with that sort of stuff. I mean, and when we were there, it was like, all you did was, sleep, wake up, eat, operate till you got tired, try to get some sleep, sometimes operate in the middle of the night, and occasionally exercise. And that was it for constantly every day. And you're just exposed to that. And after a while, you kind of become a little bit immune to it because it's like, oh, another guy whose leg's blown off. We're used to that. I remember when I first got there, it was kind of sad because I flew in through Kyrgyzstan. We unload our stuff. We're sleeping in this giant hall, like 300 guys on cots. We go in, we hook up with the Army, we were relieving. We were the Air Force, we were relieving the Army guys. And the first time I was like, we got to go work. And we get in there, and the first thing I see was this poor, he's like a 23-year-old Canadian kid, both legs blown off above the knee. Special ops guy, full beard, because they can wear full beard in special ops. You're just thinking, holy shit, welcome to the war. This is a real life. And it just never stopped from day one. It was just constant trauma. And, I don't regret going because I learned a lot, and I was there helping people. And I was privileged to be able to help people, but it's not a good place. It's not that, no one should ever look forward to war.
Yeah. What did you learn? You said you learned a lot.
Well, I mean, I learned how to improvise, to think fast on my feet, because when you're, as an orthopedic surgeon in the U.S., you're like, I need this, and you get all the equipment you need. But there you're like, I need a screw that's 44 millimeters long. Like, we got a 65 and a 20. Which one do you want? So I mean, you don't have the right equipment, the right materials. You're just trying to figure out how to do the best you can with what you have. And so it's and it's the unpredictability. There's a lot of when I was operating as a U.S. guy, I was like, my goal was to make surgery as boring as possible. It's like routine, everything the same way over and over again. That's what you want. Over there, it was like, you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know if you have the equipment. We ran out of saline. There's no water. We're doing a surgeon. We don't even have saline to rinse wounds or wash our hands. I mean, what are we going to do? And you just don't have a choice. And so sometimes you learn that you can do a lot more than you think you can.
Yeah, that's really just incredible. Like, I can't imagine how that begins to shape the way that you think. Did it change at all the way that you think about people, about humanity, about your job?
I think it made me not fear things, because I was like, anything that someone throws at me, I've seen much worse, particularly from a medical standpoint. It's kind of like I've seen the worst of the worst that you can possibly imagine. And, like I said, as I do what I'm doing now, I get a lot of negativity thrown my way. And I'm like, it's nothing. I mean, it's like, what am I worried about? And so I just kind of laugh at that stuff. So it made me a harder person, a tougher person, not a mean person. I still care very much about people. But at the same time, I'm kind of, imbued with this resilience to, keep forging ahead despite what seems to be a lot of opposition. Because I think what I'm doing obviously is controversial, with regard to diet. There's a lot of pushback. There's a lot of status quo that does not want to be disrupted. There are a lot of people that are happy to provide you with pills for your various ailments and illnesses and manage your disease, and that's a billion-trillion-dollar industry. And we're all thankful that there's medications that may help us in a certain situation, but we would much rather not have them in the first place.
Yes, very much so, which leads me to my last question. But before I ask that, where can people find you online?
So I am active on social media. Instagram, it's Shawn, S-H-A-W-N, Baker, B-A-K-E-R, 1967, which is my birth year. I'm on Twitter at SBakerMD. I've got a YouTube channel, just Shawn Baker. And so it's important. We're starting a company. It'll be out by the time this comes out, called meatrx.com. It's going to be a giant resource for people that are interested in learning more about diet, all the scientific references that support this. We're going to have some coaching component for people that want to have some support as they do this, and so that'll be something that I'm pretty excited about. And then, of course, books coming out. It'll be out by the time this episode's out. Carnivore Diet by Shawn Baker, and knock on something that it does well.
Nice, man. That's exciting. So to the end that we would much rather just not get sick than have something to treat it, what is one change that people could make that would have the biggest impact on their health?
Yeah, I think ownership, taking ownership of your own health is probably the biggest thing people do, because too many people outsource their health to other people. And I mean, and I'll speak it as a perspective as a physician. Yeah, I want to help you, but I don't have as much invested in your health as you do. So you have to take ownership of your own health, and you have to be willing to see what actually works for you. And so I think we have to step outside the box and say, what is actually helping me? Be objective about it. Measure what's important to you, not what's important to somebody else. Measure what's important to you, because ultimately you've got to live in that space. You've got to live in that body. And if your labs look great but you feel like garbage, there's something still wrong. So you have to be willing to be your own, guide for some of this stuff.
I love that. All right, guys, I couldn't agree with that advice more. So take things into your own hands. You should be doing an experiment on yourself. You should be figuring out what works for you. It's always interesting when people are so even-keeled, that have clearly a strong belief about how things should be, but can also say that, hey, at the end of the day, it's going to be up to you. Try it, see if it works for you. If it does, great. If it doesn't, move on and try something else. And speaking of trying something else, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care. Thank you guys so much for watching and being a part of this community. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. You're going to get weekly videos on building a growth mindset, cultivating grit, and unlocking your full potential.